What's up everybody, this is of course your boy Sugi JRPG here, and today I'm absolutely delighted to review Final Fantasy XIII-2 for PC. Now previously I also reviewed 13 on the channel. In case you want to have more insight into this trilogy, I highly recommend checking out that review first before this one. Now let's lay down a bit of the premise of the game. So this takes place 3 years after the events of Final Fantasy XIII. The original ending that we saw on End of 13 has now been changed and subverted. So instead of Lightning being all happy saving the world with her friends, now Lightning has basically disappeared into this time vortex, also known as Valhalla, leaving her sister Sarah and her newfound friend Noah, who is from the future, to basically set out into this journey to prevent the end of the world by fixing the timeline and also basically saving Lightning from her fate and basically rescuing her from Valhalla. So basically in a core, it is a time traveling story. Now 13-2 is also heavily connected into Lightning Returns, so this game will end in a massive cliffhanger. So in case you're gonna be buying 13-2, be prepared to also buy Lightning Return to get basically the whole story, because they probably wrote this story and then they basically decided to split it into 2 different games. That's their basically story direction here. Just saying that this is not like a standalone experience like 13 is, for instance. So let's kind of tackle down a bit of the PC port here first before we go into gameplay and story. So the PC port is definitely better looking than the console counterparts. Obviously it's higher resolution and you have a lot more options, but unlike the 13 port, it doesn't actually have an FPS mod which can basically fix out all the frame rate issues. So like during cutscenes you can like get into 60 FPS, but during battles and certain city areas it will easily drop into like 30 or 40 FPS range where the most game is. So you might actually even have much better experience in terms of FPS, like playing this game on like Xbox 360 emulator or PS3 emulator, because the FPS is just not very good, and sadly there are no mods basically that can fix out this horrible port when it comes to FPS. But if you can actually look past it, it's not really that bad, but you can definitely feel the difference and the frame drops, you know, many times during certain battles, for instance. The loading times also are quite abysmal in this port, like when you are choosing in which worlds and which timelines you are traveling. There can be a considerable amount of loading times in this game, and that's something that I would have wished that they would have changed and fixed, but you can't have everything. In 13 it definitely wasn't this bad. And also because this is a PC port and it was launched like years after, you do not have access to all of these character outfits and other DLC stuff that you saw basically on console versions, but there are certain mods which will help you to basically recover these outfits if you want to dig up and maybe search for them. And also, unlike in the console versions, you also do have the option for the Japanese audio, which might be a deal breaker for some. So let's kind of tackle now a bit of the gameplay here. So first of all, the Crystarium system is back, except this time around it's a lot more streamlined. There's not actually an ability to choose in which order you're learning these abilities. It's more like this very linear grid which is going into one direction, and this makes it very like noob friendly, and you don't really have to think too hard, like outside from like which classes are you gonna be leveling up here first. But like fundamentally I would have wished that there were a bit more freedom and, you know, flexibility on which types of, you know, decisions I could make in terms of the build. I think that's kind of like the idea of a lot of JRPGs and RPGs in general, like having a bit of a like build customization. And yeah, there are other aspects where you can, you know, show that, but fundamentally the Crystarium doesn't have the same progression locks as the original 13 had, which is very good. But outside from that aspect, I definitely think it has been a massive degrade from the original one. One of the biggest changes into the whole gameplay aspect of things in this game is that now you can capture monsters, and these are basically serving as your third party member. And these monsters are basically set in a specific class and can be boosted also via Cryptarium, via certain items that are dropping through like from monster battles and chests. But you also have the ability to merge these monsters to basically pass down specific abilities from one monster to another. So maybe this ability can only be, exclusive to this one monster. Otherwise, the monster is really bad, but you just want to level up so you can get the monster ability. And then you're going to feed that monster into the other monster to basically make it more powerful. There's a lot of customization here, which is, I guess, in a lot of ways is compensating for whatever things we are lacking with Crystarium. So I thought this was actually like a pretty good thing. But fundamentally, like, you can't really know without like going through guides and everything, like what are exactly the best monster, what are they going to be learning, and etc. Like, there's not a lot of transparency when it comes to that, but you can find a lot of guides on what exactly are the best monsters and things like that. And obviously in the console versions also you had certain DLC monsters like Lightning, for example, and some other major characters, but those are not sadly available in this port. Now in terms of the combat, it is mostly the very same thing in 13. It's the same speed, same auto battle stuff, have the same things. You have the Sentinel, the Medic, the Commando, the Ravager, etc., the Saboteur. But I would argue that in 13 you had certain boss battles which had shit ton of health and it was very tank and spank. In this one I feel the battles are a bit faster and there are less of these enemies which are like, tank and spank. You have to debuff them first, then you can kill them once their shields go down and etc. So I think they sped the game up quite considerably, which was I think a good decision. And also now if your party leader dies, it's not a game over like in 13. So instead of if Sarah dies, you get to control Noel. And if the both leaders die, then it will be game over because the monsters will not be counting as leaders. In a lot of ways, 13.2 is quite similar to 10.2 in the sense that the gameplay is a lot more questing and having a lot more freedom to backtrack to areas that you have previously visited. Since the game revolves around time traveling, you're able to visit different locations in the world at different times. Now, this kind of ended up the situation that a lot of game assets were reused a lot. I think in 10.2 they did considerably a lot of new areas and locations. I felt that in this one they were rehashing a lot of existing and previous maps and places, and there's like certain locations which has 6 different variations, and the only difference that you will be seeing is like the daylight mode. So this will be at night, this will be at daylight, this will be at noon, and this will be at winter or something like that. So some of them, the locations like felt extremely the same and everything. And I do want to emphasize also when it comes to these side quests that there were a lot of variety in it, like anywhere from puzzles, delivery quests, finding hidden items with the Moogle, and a couple of monster killing quests. In a lot of these other Final Fantasy games, the modern ones, most of the side missions being kill this monster, kill these monsters, kill this monster, kill this boss, yada yada yada. So I felt like the side quest design in 13.2 is actually quite good. There's a lot of variety in this one, and it doesn't feel like the same boring grinding all the time, even though the 13.2's combat system was kind of dumbed down from its predecessors. So I fundamentally thought that the side quests were actually pretty good in this game. Now, when it comes to the mini games, there's basically 2 mini games in this game. And one is a chocobo racing thing, kind of reminds me what we had in Star Ocean, The Last Hope, a bit more nuanced, I would say. And it's basically a derby track game, what you can see in a lot of other JRPG games. And it allows you to bet with these casino chips that allow you to redeem certain special items. Some of them are required to basically have the 100% run of this game. And some of them will unlock these certain things, and there's some special stuff there, so it's kind of worth to grind it out. And you can also train your own chocobo, tweak it, give it certain different abilities, which will give you edge on the fights. And you can also bet on the enemy's chocobos as well, which is like totally fine. And the second minigame is actually, well, slot reels, and this is basically fastest way to get these chips in the game. Because you have the ability to turn your real gil into these chips on the casino, but you also have basically the best and fastest way to get the achievement and one of the quests done in this casino world is basically playing this slot reels, which is kind of redundant. There's not sadly any type of fast mode or something that could increase the FPS to make these slots go faster or something like that. Maybe there's a mod, I don't know, but fundamentally it's a bit boring, but it's, I guess, better than nothing of having a minigame. But both of these are not like super exciting. I don't think that people are gonna be like, wow, I'm gonna be playing this game just because of these goddamn minigames. As for the audio, I already explained that there's both English and Japanese audio in this game, which is obviously great because a lot of people want to have that option, because often or not the English dubs are horrible. But with Final Fantasy games, I would argue they've always been excellent. There might be a couple of hiccups, but mostly excellent. And this game is no stranger to that. I thought the English dub was really good, high quality. I preferred Sarah's voice actor in English one over the Japanese one, which was probably the ultimate reason that I basically decided to play this game mostly through the English VA. You can switch between the game in case you want to, and I did do that a bit. I played certain segments on Japanese, and I thought it was fine as well, but perhaps I just slightly preferred the English voice acting here than I did of the Japanese, and obviously I played 13 through English as well, which probably affected my reasoning. Now, in terms of the soundtrack, I have to say, when I originally bought 13, I got the collector's edition and I listened to the soundtrack. I wasn't too big of a fan of it. Maybe my, initial reaction to 13 had something to do with it, but after I replayed the game 2 years ago, I did become actually a bit of a fan of the 13 soundtrack, and I came to appreciate it a lot more. And 13-2 also has a lot of good tracks like Wishes and Future. These are tracks that really hit home, like get an emotional connection. I might even cry when hearing these songs at times, and but I wasn't as big a fan of the battle theme in 13-2. The Blinding Light or whatever it's called in 13 is a lot better, and I think the boss fights, also everything, like the battle themes were not really like into my greatest liking, and I don't think that they were the best as they could have been. But overall the soundtrack is okay, but just not as good as in 13, I would argue. And next up, we're going to be talking about the story, and there will be some spoilers included here, so maybe you want to pause the video and come back later in case you don't want to know anything. Now, when we look into the 13 story, for example, it did two main failures. One was its characters, and the other thing was the story, which was executed and told in a very poor way. For example, the beginning of the story starts out like this random fight going on, and you don't really have much of idea what exactly is going on in here. That could have been done differently. They could have fleshed out the characters a bit more before that fight starts. There were a lot of terminology like lessee and fossee, which were not exactly told in the most clearest ways, and they had all this weird terminology, which all of them they didn't exactly have to introduce into the game. Like, if that would have been streamlined and told in a bit better ways, most of the people wouldn't have come out as confused about what exactly is going on here. And the other thing was the characters, so I think they did a couple of mistakes here. For example, like Lightning, which was this warrior woman archetype, but then they also wanted to create another warrior woman, and that was Fang. And both of them are basically the same character, strong female warrior who is basically protecting their little sister, and also kind of passive-aggressive or aggressive. And that was basically the character of Fang and Lightning. Extremely similar. You should never have the same archetype printed over on your party. Then you have obviously Hope, which was a whiny brat, nobody liked him. Zaz, probably the most liked character in the whole cast, not a perfect either. And then you have Snow, which actually I do like. I think it's kind of like a bit more cringe in a lot of ways, but I think that's kind of the appeal here. And then you had Vanille, which also was a kind of like character, but she is also like almost a carbon copy of Sarah. Like, these are almost the same two characters. Sarah is a bit more mature than Vanille, but they are mostly the same, kind of like damsel in distress type of characters. So yeah, there were a lot of mistakes in 13 as things goes on. But 13-2, however, has a very straightforward story despite being something about time traveling. And it manages to repeat itself, like what's going on, and keeping the story very clear, that it's really hard not to understand what's going on in 13.2. Also, when you reboot the game, it will gives you this sort of like what happened previously type of thing, like a recap, which helps you understand like, okay, this is where we left off and this has happened so far, which is good. So you basically have a lot of like good understanding throughout the whole game what exactly is going on without these super complex terminologies and other things. Now, when it comes to the characters, this game revolves around heavily on 4 characters, and everybody else are like super minor in this one. Like everything revolves around Sarah and Noel, who are the protagonists in the story, the characters you play, and then you have the villain, Caius, and the mysterious seer known as Yule. Now, the previous protagonists barely make any appearances outside from Lightning, and who was only kind of relevant in the beginning of the game. And Hope also plays a, and he, as I said, he was universally probably considered the worst character in Final Fantasy XIII. Now he's all grown up, he's older, and he's playing this sort of supportive role in the game, and he's less of an annoying dweeb. Okay, like he's likable character. He's not like a great character, but he is like more likable and tolerable than he was in 13. But the thing is, whenever you do a sequel into any medium, I think it's fairly important to have fan service of these old characters, whatever they're minor or major ones. People want to see those characters, and that was a big faulty of 13.2, is that we didn't get enough of that fan service. We didn't get enough Snow, we didn't get enough of Zaz, we didn't get enough Lightning, of all of these characters we wanted to see. None of them like really had a lot of screen time outside from Hope, and that was something that they totally missed here. Now, historically, I always said that if you really want to show how bad you are at fighting stuff, you can go write anything revolving around time traveling, and that really shows up here. Now, overall, the world of 13 is not really that interesting, okay? Perhaps time traveling would have been cool in Final Fantasy VII, like seeing how Shinra is before it was built up, or in Final Fantasy IX you get to see before the Gaia come into the world, or Final Fantasy X you get to see like Hyzumi or Braska or something. In those games, it would have been very interesting to have this time traveling mechanism where you can go visit these different cool places. But in 13.2, I don't care anything about the world around it. Like, there's nothing interesting there. Nothing of interesting of past or in the future that I would be getting very much invested in. So it was a kind of weird game to choose this whole time traveling stuff. And I would always, advise writing against time traveling stories, because many writers don't really understand the base quantum mechanics or theoretical physics to develop a time traveling story that won't have trillion plot holes that this genre, generates it normally. So it usually works best in like comedies and movies, for the most part. Now, but I do want to say that 13.2 didn't totally shit the bed with this whole time traveling thing. It could have been a lot more confusing for one. I do feel that in the grand scheme of things, not that much in terms of the story and plot takes place in the mid part of the game, and I feel like everything was basically congested into the very beginning of this game and into the very ending sequences where the cliffhanger basically happens. But to give you like a final verdict over this game, I think, ironically, some ways the game is better than 13, and in some ways it's way worse. So it's kind of like a mixed bag in a lot of ways. If they had a bit of a stronger story, I think this could have been turned out a bit, rather solid Final Fantasy entry, to be honest. But, from a gameplay perspective, not being that linear and having the ability to travel around in the world, these different locations, and find these relics, artifacts, which is kind of like a nice side quest thing, but you don't always get a lot of like details where to search these things, and you have to basically go for a guide, and that's not always like something that I find like a good game design, but whatever. But despite its flaws, it was an enjoyable experience, and now I have to play Lightning Returns, and then I can give you like a whole, sweep about like, is the story actually really good or not, because they are kind of like associated between each other, so you're kind of reviewing it as a whole. It's still kind of enjoyable game from the gameplay perspective, and there are some, side bosses that you can do also, which gives you, a lot of things to do. But I have to say, a lot of rehashed assets in this one compared to 10-2. But hey, thanks for watching, guys. I will be seeing you in the next review. Cheers.